Well, welcome to another Friday night, and we've been looking at the 60 characteristics of complex trauma. Today we're coming to one that might seem very innocent, like it's no big deal, but it's a big deal for people from complex trauma, and it's the tendency to be negative and critical. So what I want to say up front is being negative and critical is both an attitude and an action. It's a mindset that people from complex trauma develop where they choose, often without realizing that they're choosing it, but they're choosing to find fault with stuff. They're choosing to look for negative. And so I want to start with just kind of giving you a definition, a better understanding of what I am talking about. So here's a definition. It's a common but very dangerous headspace for those with CPTSD or complex trauma. They are marked by an overall discontent and find fault with just about everything. So let me give you some examples of how this would work out in people's life. So somebody with a kind of a negative orientation, a negative critical headspace, is somebody that tends to complain a lot. And they might do it in joking ways, sarcastic ways, but there's a complaining is a common thing. Or they blame others a lot for their problems, for their discontent. When they meet people, they look for a flaw. And so they are very commonly known for criticizing people, pointing out their flaws. Many will have a victim mentality. So it's, oh, my life is awful, poor me, and just dwell on all of the negatives in their life. Others, when they're in a situation that's new or different, or they feel uncomfortable, they jump to the worst case scenario. And they go to, this is all terrible, and it's a very negative thing. Others dwell on bad news. All the time, they just focus on all the bad news in the media, social media, from reports from friends, etc. Think of a person who's in a hurry, okay? And nobody is cooperating. So you are driving somewhere, and you're in a hurry to get there, but nobody is making that easy for you. So what do you do as you're driving? Everybody else on the road is an idiot. Everybody else is stupid. And you just criticize everything. You criticize the city because the traffic lights aren't timed properly. Negative, negative, negative. And then sometimes if you picture yourself where you're tired, exhausted, and you just want a bigger bubble tonight. You don't want people coming into your bubble wanting to connect. So what happens when your spouse wants to connect, your children want to spend time with you, somebody just needs to talk to you? You tend to find fault with them. You tend to think they're just selfish, they're not considerate of my needs, and you become very negative. So before we look at the complex trauma connection to this, why people from complex trauma have this negative orientation, let me first make a distinction between healthy negative and unhealthy negative. Healthy critical and unhealthy critical. So healthy critical is what we would call discernment. And discernment is what we train our children to do. So don't trust people just because they're nice. See past the niceness to the truth about the person. Pay attention to red flags. Pay attention to your gut. And so what we are wanting people to do is see the other person accurately, to know whether they're safe or unsafe, healthy or unhealthy. And so discernment is not being fooled by the external, it's seeing past that to an accurate picture of the person. Unhealthy critical is finding faults with others, not for healthy reasons, but for very unhealthy reasons. So this is not just about being critical. This is why I'm critical. It can be for a good purpose to stay safe, or it can have very unhealthy purposes. So I want to give you 22 reasons why people from complex trauma often become negative and critical. So what I want you to see is it's just not one or two things. This being negative and critical meets many needs with people who are in danger. And so it becomes part of their life in many different ways. And so to understand that is really important in beginning to identify the reasons why you are often negative and critical. And again, I want to point out that for many people from complex trauma, this is a default setting. This is where they go to subconsciously, don't even realize they're doing it. It happens in their subconscious mind and periodically comes to their conscious mind. So the first thing to understand about complex trauma is that you're in constant danger. You cannot resolve the dangerous situations. You can't get to a place of safety. And so what the brain is doing is saying, I gotta find a way to protect this child. So what can I do to keep this child safe? Number one, I will look for danger in every situation I enter. So now I will train that person to look for potential problems, to look for potential harm. I am not wanting that person to see the situation from an objective point of view. They need to go in and immediately look for danger. So the brain is trained to look for negative. But then if they still are getting hurt all the time, the brain has to take it up a notch. And what it then does is say, okay, I can't just look for obvious danger. I have to look for potential danger and then jump to the worst case scenario. So potential danger, it might be dangerous, it might not, but I am going to choose that it is dangerous. So I will jump to, this is bad. Even if it's an uncomfortable feeling, I will jump to a worst case scenario. So it is an essential survival tool for a child in constant danger to begin looking for negative, to train themselves to be negative. But then let's bring it to the shame. So when a child is in constant danger, often it's because they're abused, they're neglected, they're abandoned, their needs, emotional needs aren't being met. And so they think it's their fault. So I must be doing something wrong. I must be bad. I must not be lovable. I must not be valuable. That's why I'm being abused and neglected. That creates a core identity of shame. That belief that I'm not good enough. So what happens with shame? It develops this inner critic in your brain that no matter what you do, you go, not good enough, not good enough, negative, critical. If others pay you compliments, the inner critic says they don't know the real you. If they did, they wouldn't say that. And negative is the voice in your head. But then the child doesn't want to feel not good enough, not valuable. So the brain is looking for ways to create a sense of I have value. And one of the things that the brain does is say, let's find fault with everybody else. Because if I can put everybody else down, that'll make me feel better about myself. And so now, being critical meets the need of not feeling good enough because I put everybody else down. Then, for many people to feel value, their brain goes to, if I am perfect, then people will love me and respect me. That's what will give me value. That will fix my shame. So, they try to be perfect. But what happens? Nobody can be perfect. So instead of improving their shame, improving their sense of not having enough value, trying to be perfect actually reinforces it and creates a greater negative critic. Because now you focus on every time you fail to be perfect. And that becomes your obsession. And you make that a constant thing in your mind. Another purpose that this being negative fills is the child who's neglected, abused, and abandoned has many needs that aren't being met. But they have learned that if you go and ask people to meet those needs, it's likely they're not going to. They're going to reject you, or they're going to punish you. They're going to call you selfish. So the only way to get your needs met is you can only trust yourself, so you have to manipulate. And so one of the tools for manipulating is when I meet a person, I want to find out something really bad about them that I can use as leverage against them. That I can threaten them, that I will expose this area of their life unless they do what I want. And so now I am looking for flaws in people. I am looking for the dirt on people, more negative. Then for people who remain in a victim mentality, where they go to a place where they go, I don't want to choose to change. I just want people to feel sorry for me. And so what happens in that person's mind, in order to reinforce this victim mentality and getting others to feel sorry for them, they have to blame everybody, everything for their problems. They never take ownership for their problems. It's always somebody else's fault. And that's another type of negative orientation. One of the things with complex trauma is a tremendous fear of failure. And so what happens for a lot of people when they go to start something new is this fear that they might fail rises up inside of them. And so they want to quit. They don't even want to give it a try, a fair try, because they're pretty sure they'll fail. That's what shame has told them. And so how do you get an excuse to quit? Well, you find something wrong with this new project, with this new endeavor. And if I can find enough wrong things about it, enough negative things, then I have an excuse to quit or to not even start. Take that a little bit further. For some, that then goes to the need to change in their life. And so what I find with people that come to react, and they begin to realize there's not an easy fix to trauma. I'm going to have to deal with some very old wounds that are going to be painful. I am going to have to use new tools that are going to be very challenging. I'm not willing to do that. Okay, so how do I get out of changing? Well, let's criticize React. Let's criticize all the teachers of React. Let's criticize the way they teach their content. Let's find something negative to justify me not changing. Another very subconscious thing that happens for people is if you are from complex trauma, there's a good chance your parents also have complex trauma. And you're just the next generation that's affected. So if your parents have complex trauma, there's a good chance that they have a negative critical orientation. And you probably grew up with parents going to a social event and then afterwards just criticizing, pointing out all the flaws in different people, gossiping all the dirt about people. You grew up in an environment where your parents were always pointing out your flaws and not encouraging you and validating you in good ways. And so as you grew up in that, without realizing it, you got those tapes in your head. So now when you go into any situation, you just hear your parents' voices in your head, and they become your voices. So they trained you as well to have a negative orientation. Another thing that I find with many people I deal with is to notice what they get especially negative about. And often what they get negative and critical about when they meet somebody or watch somebody, the thing that bothers them the most about that person is usually the thing they like the least in themselves. It's the part of them that got made fun of, the part of them that they hated, wish that wasn't them. Now, when they see that in somebody else, it triggers an immediate negative, critical response to that person. But really, they're just projecting their own issues onto that person. Another way that many people from complex trauma try to solve their shame is they can't have a bigger house, they can't have more money than others, they can't compete in the looks arena, they can't compete in the sports arena and be better than others in any of those arenas. So what they do is they go to the moral arena, the religious arena. And so now my self-righteousness, I am more righteous than you. But how do I keep my sense of being more righteous than you? I point out all the ways you're not righteous. I focus on your moral flaws. So it's necessary to feed a self-righteous attitude. Another thing that happens in complex trauma is that parents can have unrealistic expectations of their children. So they can say to your child, you should have known I wanted that. In other words, to the child, you should be a mind reader. Or you should not be a child in the sense of being busy, being active, making noise, playing. You should be just quiet, seen, not heard. And so that unrealistic expectation caused parents to constantly be criticizing the child. And so now they can do that in their adult life today. They can have unrealistic expectations of others, their spouse, their children, their friends. And if those people don't meet those unrealistic expectations, and they can't, then they find negative criticism about those people. Another thing that some parents in complex trauma wanted to do is they wanted to have their children look only to them. They wanted to be the greatest influence, have the greatest power in their child's life. So they wanted to create this extra loyalty to them, to the family. And one of the things that they often did is they then had to destroy everybody else so that the children would not look to anybody else for guidance, for friendship, just to talk about things. So they found fault with every friend the child brought home. They found fault with every family that the child was attracted to, just to try to create that loyalty. And sadly, within many complex trauma families, they develop a solution to their shame as being racism. Because I'm white, we're better than black people. We're better than indigenous people. And so they put that into their children to say, we're better than them. And now you find fault with black people, with indigenous people, in order to try to feel better about yourself. Many in complex trauma had dads who were very angry. Anger was a huge issue. But what did dad do to justify his anger? He found fault with everything. So it's not my fault I'm angry, it's that. All of that crap. That's the justification for my anger. Then I've seen something else that people do. They know in recovery that they need to develop some healthy friendships, to build a new support system with fairly safe, healthy people. But that's a scary thing, because the fear of rejection and abandonment is so deeply ingrained. And so what many people do when they start to get to know somebody and they go, I like this person, I should develop a friendship with them, fear kicks in. And so what then does fear do is, I can't go there. That's too risky. So, how do I justify not developing a friendship with this person? I look for faults in that person. I look for all their flaws to justify not developing a friendship with them. Another purpose for being negative and critical is to justify your own flaws and your own not changing. So if somebody says, you are always inconsiderate or disrespectful, you might respond by saying, at least I'm not as bad as them or them or them. So because they're worse than me, then that means I'm okay. I don't have to change. Sad that it happens so much, but it does. Then, one of the extreme responses to extreme shame is narcissism. Thinking I'm better than everybody, smarter, that everybody looks up to me, everybody thinks I'm a genius. And so what can happen in a narcissist is they need to create the image and maintain the image of being better than everybody, smarter than everybody. And so what they will do to do that is criticize stuff. Another thing that can happen, and where this critical negative mindset plays a role, is wanting everybody to agree with you. And feeling that if they don't agree with you, they're saying that you're stupid. They're saying that you're not good enough. It triggers your shame. And so what a lot of people can do when somebody doesn't agree with them is, well, before you say I'm stupid, I'm going to say you're stupid. And I'm going to criticize you. I'm going to put you down. And it's their way of responding to people not agreeing with them. Another thing that people do is if somebody comes and says, you need to change what you're doing as a parent in how you respond to your kids in this area, because you're doing a lot of damage. Well, you don't like that message. It exposes you, and you don't want to look at that area of your life. So, but you can't discount the message. So what do? You discount the messenger. Well, you're a jerk. You don't know what you're talking about. Look at your kids. They're not perfect. So if I can discount the messenger, then I don't have to listen to their message. And then the final one. People with a lot of shame, complex trauma, who don't feel good about themselves, can easily resent when others who are also on the recovery journey succeed, get promoted, get asked to do a job that they weren't asked to do. And so now their way of resenting the success of others is to tear that person down. So 22 purposes that being negative and critical filled in the lives of people from complex trauma. How did you do? How many of those have you used in your life, often without realizing why you do it or seeing how often you do it? And I hope you see just how big of an issue it can be. But that takes us to the next thing. Because being negative and critical operates as a default setting for most from complex trauma, they're often in that state or that mindset, totally unaware that they're there. And so it can do a lot of stuff in their brain without them even noticing that they've gone to that negative place. So I want to look at what are the things that trigger today slipping back into a negative, critical mindset. And let me say again that for most people from complex trauma, if they're in a good headspace, positive, but they slip back into this negative, critical headspace, that puts them in great danger. And I'm going to explain that in just a little bit. But what causes me to go back there without realizing it? The big picture answer is this. Anytime my limbic brain, my emotion center, has predominantly negative emotions, that will put me back into a negative, critical mindset. So just think of yourself. If you're full of anger, anxiety, you're depressed, you're feeling very guilty, your shame has been triggered, you're bored, you're discontent, you've got a lot of fear happening. If all of those are happening in your brain, or even just a portion of those are happening in your brain, my guess would be that you would become quite negative and critical. So that limbic brain, when it gets triggered with negative emotions, its go-to is negative critical thoughts. So be aware of that. So let me take that into kind of the events that can trigger those negative emotions. So if you've just failed, you're embarrassed, you feel terrible about it, I suspect that would take you to a negative critical mindset. Or if you're feeling stressed to the max, overwhelmed, not sure how you're going to keep coping, or if you're frustrated, not just with one thing not working right, but with a series of things just aren't going the way you are, or if you are living with a whole bunch of unmet needs. You're lonely, you don't feel accepted, you don't feel part of, you're tired, I suspect you would get negative. Because those are the events that create this limbic brain that is now living with mainly negative emotions. And to the brain, that means we're in danger. So let's go back to an old tool, which is let's get negative about it. Now, what I want you to understand is this. When you go to a negative, when your limbic brain has negative emotions and you go to a negative critical mindset, it'll make you feel better instantaneously, but only for a moment. And then it'll actually make things worse. So the limbic brain solution is instant gratification, and becoming negative gives some instant gratification. But what it doesn't see is that in the long run, it makes you more discontent, more negative. It puts more pain into your limbic brain, and now it becomes a vicious negative cycle that gradually takes you to a darker and darker place. Let me expand another event or another set of circumstances that can take you to a negative critical mindset. And this one, it doesn't mean that something bad is happening. And that's the important thing to understand with this one. So anytime you feel a sense of insecurity or uncertainty, or you don't have a rock, a person to lean on, you feel kind of all alone. For most people, when they get to that state of instability, insecurity, uncertainty, they go to a negative critical mindset. So that could be anytime you go through change. Anytime you go to a new job, you move, you go through just change of any kind, even good change, getting married, all kinds of good things. Any transition. Transitions feel like you're away from your rock. You're not sure what is solid ground yet underneath you. And so you begin to have all these unknowns. What about this? What about this? What about this? And that can take you to a negative critical mindset. So it could be relationship instability. It could be job instability. All of a sudden, there's unknowns. Things aren't secure like they used to be. Or it could be a loss. When you lose something that was very important to you, either a person, a part of your life, an event, when that is gone, is taken from you, you go into this time of insecurity, instability, uncertainty, and for many, they become very negative. Now, there are some other triggers that are important to understand. You will have a negative mindset towards a person if you have a resentment against them. So just think of somebody that you might have a resentment against. It's kind of this burning anger, hatred. It doesn't matter what that person does. They could be helping the lady across the street unload her groceries. You choose to see it negatively. You choose to say, well, their motive is bad. You find fault somehow with what they're doing, even though it is all good. Or if you lose respect for somebody you used to respect, so you can even think of you're dating and you have this respect for a person. You get married, live with them for a while, you lose respect. Now they can do the exact same thing they did when they were dating you, but now you see it negatively. Back then you saw it positively. Now you see everything they do through a negative lens. So there are all kinds of things that can trigger this kind of mindset today. So part of growing and changing is being aware of your triggers, being aware of the needs that being negative and critical seem to meet in your life growing up, and maybe your brain still thinks meets today. But what you have to understand from all of that, again, is this is not an innocent problem. It might be easy to try to minimize that it's not doing any damage, it's not a big deal. But think with me through about some of the results of living this way. I want you to understand that it brings about a personality that will always become negative no matter what is happening. So I call it the 90-10 pattern. So it goes like this. Let's say you were to come into a new program, and when you first come into it, you go, wow, this is so good. And you see 90% of this program is fantastic. And you rave about it to all of your friends. But then you see a couple things that you don't like. What do you then obsess about and focus on? The things that you don't like, which might only be 10% of the program. But as you focus on them and obsess on them, what happens? That 10% grows into 90%. And now in your mind, this program is 90% bad. Last week it was 90% good, but this week it's 90% bad. Why? Because once you fixate on a negative, you blow it up until it takes over everything in your thinking. And what that means is it doesn't matter what you do, who you're with, what organization, what program you're involved with. If you have a negative critical mindset, you will gradually find negative in everything. And that will add to your discontent. Now, for many people, once they start getting negative, especially if they're an addict, it becomes a very dangerous place for them. They can quickly go from negative to hopeless. Well, this is all negative, what's the point? This is all terrible, I might as well give up. Throw in the towel. And so for many addicts, to get into a negative place in their thinking often starts the dominoes falling towards relapse. And I tell many clients that the earlier you can catch that you're becoming negative, the better, because then you can stop it. But once you slide into that negative headspace, I ask clients, how long can you stay there without doing anything to change it? How long can you stay there before you relapse? And for many people in early recovery, 1, 2, max 3 days. And then they're giving up. That's how serious this can be. But it's not just in the context of addictions that it's a serious issue. This negative critical mindset damages relationships tremendously, especially intimate relationships. So what your partner, what your children, close friends, because of your negative critical mindset, they never feel good enough when they're around you because you're always pointing out flaws. And so they have a hard time being around you, wanting to spend time with you because you're just like a prickly porcupine. Others are afraid to open up to you about some of their problems or even good stuff happening in their life because you're going to find fault with it. You're going to judge them. And so some people will lie to you because they know you'll criticize them if they tell you the truth. So now they can't even have an honest relationship with you. And so for you to be negative, critical all the time makes you a very unsafe person. And without taking you to too much guilt, but I need to just highlight the damage it does to children. All of the brain research is showing us that children's brains, in order to develop healthy, and their whole central nervous system to develop in a healthy way, they need a loving, nurturing environment. That means that they're getting tons of validation. It's a positive, encouraging environment. They need criticism once in a while, but that criticism is given to point them to how they could change and become healthier. It's not just to tear down. It's not to punish. And so children, even if they get some criticism, they need to have it balanced out with lots of positives, lots of encouragement. But if you are a negative, critical parent, it's very likely that your criticism is going to be more than the validation your children receive, more than the encouragement that they receive. And that will do great damage to your child. They won't feel they can connect with you. They won't feel safe around you. It creates complex trauma in children because you are not a safe person. There's another result. If you're part of a team or an organization and you're a negative person, some would refer to you as an energy vampire. So whenever there's this dream and lofty goals, you find fault with them all. Whenever there's this new plan that the organization is going to execute and everybody's excited about it, well, everybody but you is excited about it. And you just suck the wind out of the sails of everybody with a positive goal and a positive idea. And the final negative result is that you really limit your own potential. Because you're afraid to start something, to change, to do new things. Because you got so much negative going on in your head. You're looking for excuses to quit stuff before you even start. And so you greatly limit your own potential to grow, to be productive, to help others. So again, this is such a serious issue. So what do we do about it? How do we heal? How do we change this? Start with mindfulness. And what I mean by that is catch yourself. When you catch yourself sliding into being negative and critical about everything, finding fault with everything, be curious about it and go, what's going on here? Why am I going to this negative, critical place? And pay attention to the underlying issues that are driving it so that you can then deal with those issues. But if you see yourself sliding into that, stop yourself. Don't feed it. Choose to look at stuff positively. Choose to just shut down going there and obsessing on negative. And then, instead of focusing on all of the flaws in everybody around you, just make a commitment to focus on your own stuff for now. Because it's dangerous for you to get preoccupied with the failures of others. Just focus on your own issues. But then work towards seeing others accurately. so that you can learn to trust your gut again. Look for red flags. You're not doing it to put them down for all the wrong reasons. You're doing it to find safe, healthy people. And what I find with a lot of people, it's hard to know if you're reading the situation accurately when you've been so negative for so long. So have somebody that you trust who's objective, that you can say, okay, here's how I see this person. Am I seeing them accurately? Here's how I see this organization. Am I seeing it accurately? Get help in learning how to be an accurate viewer of people and organizations. Then, very practically, start focusing on practicing gratitude, validating people, encouraging people. Now, be aware that as you do that, that's going to be totally different from how you've lived for so long. So it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel awkward, unnatural. You're almost going to feel a bit embarrassed doing that. But get through that. That's okay. Do it until it becomes something that feels very natural. And then for some of you, you're going to need to set boundaries with negative people. You can't hang around them very often. Because if you spend too much time with them, you find yourself becoming negative. So you're going to need some boundaries. For others of you, you might have to stop watching the news for a while or being on social media, because that just fuels your negativity and your obsession with negative stuff. And then the final thing, don't dwell on your past failures. Learn from them, change, grow, but don't keep beating yourself up. Don't keep spending time there, because that'll keep you in a negative headspace toward yourself. And that will spread into all your other relationships. So that is becoming healthy in this area. And can I say, this is going to take some work and time. You just don't change this overnight. This is deeply ingrained. This has been operating at a subconscious level. So be patient with yourself. That's the end of part one. We're going to take a short break, and then I'll be back for the Christian part. Well, welcome back. We've been slowly working through the life of Peter, one of the followers of Jesus, and learning so many lessons from him that help people who are dealing with complex trauma. And today, we're at the part where Jesus has gone back to heaven. There are 120 followers of Jesus, and they're now wondering what to do. And then the day of Pentecost, 50 days after their Passover came, this amazing stuff happened, the wind and the fire, people talking different languages. And all of a sudden, Peter was kind of thrust into the limelight and had to give an explanation for what was going on. And then we're now at the days after that. On that day of Pentecost, 5,000 people, after Peter talked, 5,000 people said, hey, we want to follow Jesus. So what we read next is these 5,000 new people, the 120, they worship together at the temple each day, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. So what you see there in the days following Pentecost is positive, positive, positive. More people following Jesus. Everybody in the community thinking this new group is so wonderful, very positive, goodwill. Excitement amongst the people. Wow, look at the growth that's happening. Look at the changes that are happening. It was just looking fantastic. But what people didn't know is that God wanted to take this new group of followers of Jesus in a new direction that they had never gone before, that the Jewish religion had not gone to before, and he wanted Peter and Paul to lead people in this brand new direction. And that was to reach out to non-Jewish people or Gentiles to make them some of the followers, because up till now, in the 5,000 and then those added daily, those are all Jewish people. And so the early church was just basically Jewish. God now wanted to add Gentiles, but he wanted to add them as equals to Jews, not sub-Jews. And that was a brand new way of looking at Gentiles, a brand new way of thinking about religion. And Peter was going to be the trailblazer in doing that. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Peter was going to get a ton of opposition. Opposition from outside the church, but opposition from within the church. And here's the application if you're in recovery. Your family, where you got your complex trauma probably, had its own way of doing things, its own set of rules, stuff that was considered okay. Now you're in recovery trying to get healthy. You're going to do things that go against the way your family does things. You're going to reach beyond just your family for support. You're going to change and become different than your family. You're going to set boundaries with your family, and they're not going to like it. And so recovery from complex trauma means not an easy road where everybody's excited about the changes in you, though that will happen to a degree, but it also includes you're going to get opposition. You're going to get people, often those closest to you, who aren't very happy about the changes in you that they're seeing. And that's what Peter is going to illustrate for us. So let me show you the outside opposition. In Acts 4, it says, while Peter and John were speaking to the people, they were confronted by the religious leaders, the Jewish religious leaders. These leaders were very disturbed that Peter and John were teaching the people that through Jesus there is a resurrection of the dead. They arrested them and put them in jail until morning. But many of the people who heard their message believed it. So the number of men who believed now totaled about 5,000. So the religious leaders start bringing opposition. Here's why. The religious leaders had just moved to get rid of Jesus because Jesus was drawing people away from their religion. And they saw their religion as their way to have power and wealth. They weren't religious leaders with pure motives who were doing it from a healthy place. They were using religion to feed their own egos, their own power, their own wealth. And Jesus was messing with that. And so they moved to get rid of Jesus, and they got rid of Jesus. And I think many of them thought, okay, we're done with that. Now all the people will come back to us, and our power will be reestablished. But then they hear about what Peter and John and the other disciples are doing, and the people that are now joining their cause, and what they realize is that this Jesus issue isn't dead yet. Jesus might be gone, but his cause is still going forward, and it is having a greater impact even than when Jesus was around. 5,000 people, and they are getting nervous that they're going to lose their wealth and their power. And so they are determined, we have to stop this. So they began to do all kinds of different things that would be considered opposition. So we saw they put Peter and John in jail. And they did that repeatedly to many of the leaders. Some, they threatened to have them put in prison. Some they stoned to death. Some they killed. In other ways, they gave laws that forbid them to preach. It was opposition after opposition. And so Peter has been in this very exciting environment where so much good is happening, and now all of a sudden that's starting to get a lot of resistance. And their lives are in constant danger now. This is no longer a place where you can just serve with no fear of anything bad happening. They were always looking over their shoulder. But I don't think that was the hardest type of opposition. I think the harder opposition was the stuff that came from within. So to help you understand that, the Jewish religion, which had been going for thousands of years, believed that God chose them to bring the Messiah into the world, to bring the Scriptures, the Word of God, into the world, and that made them special to God. And some then took that further, the way they shouldn't have, but did, into thinking we're better than non-Jews. God loves us more than non-Jews. And they looked down on non-Jews. And then they looked at the laws that God gave them. God forbid them to eat pork. They had all kinds of dietary laws. God required the men to be circumcised. They had laws about the clothes that they wore, the rituals that they had that were not part of the Gentile world. And so what they thought is that if a person wanted to follow God, that was great if they were a Gentile, but they would have to basically become a Jew as part of following God. So they couldn't stay the way they were because they felt that was not what God wanted. God wanted people to be Jews or like Jews. And now Peter comes along and says God's message is he wants to reach out to Gentiles and bring them in as our equals. That means they don't have to be circumcised. That means they can eat pork. That means they don't have to follow our customs. Can you imagine what that did in the lives of many of the people who had been loyal Jews and followers of God for years and now were loyal followers of Jesus? To hear that these people don't have to become Jews, that these people, God sees them the exact same way. And so what you can imagine is there was tons of arguments that took place. There was tension amongst key leaders. Some weren't sure that Peter got this right. Some weren't sure that this was really God's plan. And what we find in the book of Acts is that things got so bad that the church almost split apart. They had to call a special conference of all the leaders to hash this out. That's how much tension there was. And so I think Peter went from being respected and loved by everybody to all of a sudden having some people who weren't so kind to him anymore, who were a little bit curt with him, who were saying things behind his back that put him down. He felt the tension. He felt the negativity by some. But what we find is even after that conference in Jerusalem, there were still people that followed Peter around who tried to undo his message, who tried to say, no, you have to become a Jew. Opposition did not go away. So for the rest of his life, Peter experienced constant opposition from without and within. And eventually he was martyred. He was killed. He was crucified for following Jesus so faithfully. So, if you are in recovery, expect opposition. That goes with the territory. Yes, you're going to have days that are easy, but you're going to have days that are hard. And if you don't accept that, you'll probably give up. I just hope Peter's example, his willingness to continue in the face of much opposition, will encourage you to do the same. Let's pray. Father, I just thank you for Peter, for a man who just continue to persevere, to push ahead, despite all of the opposition from without and within. And I just pray you encourage anybody here today who's discouraged, anybody who's thinking about giving up because it's so hard for them right now, that you would just give them the strength and encouragement to continue. Amen. Well, that's the end of our evening. Thank you so much for being with us.